Hello friends. Today we'll talk about operating companies in Montenegro using a hypothetical software company as an example. Of course, not all companies in Montenegro are actually operating. Moreover, most companies do not conduct any business activity, since Montenegro's legislation is much more liberal than that of Western European countries or the USA. And in fact, no one requires companies to actually operate. Nevertheless, the number of operating companies is increasing. Especially in the past year, there's really been some kind of breakthrough. People are gradually realizing, and more people understand, that having legal income is important. Because if you don't spend all of your earnings and manage to save something, sooner or later, you want to make some purchases. For example, when you buy real estate, the first thing they might ask you is where, in fact, you got the money. That's why there are more and more operating companies. Today, we are going to talk about this. Why did I choose a programming company as an example? Because the vast majority of Russian immigrants who come to live in Montenegro are various types of freelancers, primarily programmers, although not only them, there are also designers and other similar professions. So what do you need in order to start conducting real business and channel your income through your company's account? First of all, you need to open a foreign currency account. In Montenegro, there is a domestic account and a foreign currency account. What are these? A domestic account is an account used to receive payments within the country where you are located. And a foreign currency account in Russian, this would probably be called a transit account, is needed for international transactions. Since the vast majority of programmers, almost all of them are service exporters, their clients are foreign. So they need a foreign currency account in order to receive payments from abroad. Accordingly, it is absolutely necessary to open such an account and to inform your accountant about this. For example, use when you are just starting to prepare the documents to open a bank account, and the accountant will open this type of account for you. Second, you need to carry out fiscalization. What does this mean? You cannot simply create an invoice in Word or Excel or by any other means and send it to your client. You need to do everything properly to avoid getting fined later. The correct way is to use a special fiscalization program. That is, you issue the invoice in this program, and the invoice is registered with the tax office indicating that a particular company has issued an invoice. You can go to a special portal of the tax office and check that your invoice has indeed been issued and is present there. This is done in a specialized program. You then give this fiscalized invoice to your accountant. First of all, you created it in the program, it was registered on the portal, it exists, and the tax office has the data that you issued such an invoice. And in addition, you gave it to your accountant so they can start recording this transaction. And you also give it to your client. In fact, you can give your client either this invoice or any other one. That is, you can simply write it in Word. If, for example, your client does not know Montenegrin, the invoice, of course, which is issued in Montenegro, is in Montenegrin. If the client does not know this language, there is absolutely no problem. You just make one in Word and give it to the client. The main thing is that both the accounting department and the tax office have a copy of the invoice. It goes to the tax office automatically, and you send it to the accountant by email or via WhatsApp. Next, taxes. Today we will look at taxes in detail, all the ones that will concern you. The first is the income tax. The income tax is progressive. The higher the salary, the higher the tax. So the poor pay less and the rich well. The rich pay more. In principle, this is quite logical and, in my opinion, correct. It's rather difficult to say what percentage the income tax is, because as I just mentioned, it's progressive and always varies. But I've prepared a couple of examples for you so you can see what the income taxes are. And I'll also talk about what salary level is optimal from a tax perspective, so you don't end up paying higher rates. For that, we need to switch to my computer and look at the examples I've prepared. I'll show you two examples. The first one is a specific real-life example. I've just blurred out the company name here, you don't need it. This is an example of a company that is not operating. The director is employed at a quarter-time rate to pay less in taxes, and accordingly, his salary is minimal, since a quarter-time rate is also 4 times less than the minimum. The upper payment is the payroll tax, as you can see, 28 euros and 90 cents per month, and the lower payment is what the person actually receives, 112 euros and 50 cents. But let me remind you once again, this is a company that is not operating. In other words, everything here is set up to pay as little tax as possible. This example isn't particularly interesting to us in this case. Let's look at another one. All right, now this one I took from my own company. The salary is what I actually receive in hand. I took the maximum amount so there wouldn't be an increased coefficient. In other words, I pay, let's say, relatively little. As you can see, I receive 591 euros and 50 cents. By the way, this is the lowest salary in my organization. Naturally, I pay my employees as much as we've agreed upon. But for myself, I can set an optimized salary so as not to overpay. This is for a full-time position, 40 hours a week. The salary is just above the minimum. That is, the minimum salary in Montenegro is 450 euros. I set my own salary at 591 euros and 50 cents. Because if I set a higher salary, there will also be an increased tax coefficient, which in this case is not beneficial for me. And as you can see, with this salary, 151 euros and 90 cents in taxes are paid monthly. But again, I changed this. I set it for a single employee, meaning how much would be paid if I were the only one working in my organization. In that case, this is the amount that would be paid on 151 euros and 90 cents. In addition to the salary tax, there is also a profit tax. The profit tax, just like the salary tax, is also differentiated. But we won't be interested in all possible options because, again, let me remind you, today we're looking at the example of programming companies. And programming companies, I think you'll agree with me, almost all of them earn less than 100,000 euros. If you earn up to 100,000 euros a year, then accordingly you pay the minimum profit tax of 9%. By the way, that's the lowest profit tax in Europe. So I think everything is clear with the profit tax, 9%. The dividend tax, which will also be of direct interest to us, is 15%. Dividends are distributed once a year, and when you pay out dividends, you pay 15% tax and accordingly receive the remaining 85% as dividends in hand. But there is another tax which may be unpleasant for some, but in our case it won't concern us. This is VAT. In most cases, VAT in Montenegro is 21%, and for software companies it is also 21%. But programming firms, Russian firms, or Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian ones living in Montenegro area, in almost all cases, I know of only one exception, exporters of services. When exporting, VAT is not paid, which in principle is quite logical. Governments of all countries are interested in encouraging and stimulating exports. That's why VAT is not paid on exports. Accordingly, programmers living in Montenegro, at least foreign programmers, almost never pay VAT. So what else is there to say here? Yes, that's it for taxes. Let's talk about the cost of accounting services. The cost of accounting services in my case, and actually for almost everyone, not just me, is basically the same for nearly everyone. Why is that? Back at the very beginning of my career, when I started my first business and was experimenting with different pricing models, I came to the conclusion that the price should always be market-based. If you set your price lower than your competitors, you don't really get a significant increase in clients. You're just turning down money. If you set your price higher, people stop coming to you. And probably most of the companies in Montenegro are familiar with this logic. They operate the same way. For example, just a week ago, I checked the prices at other companies and found that they're all the same, with very few exceptions. There are companies that set their prices 1.5 times higher, but those are extremely rare. To make it clearer, let's switch to the screen and take a look at, so to speak, an excerpt from my contract with clients. Here you can see the cost of accounting services on your screens. The very first line at the top is highlighted in bold. The price is 50 euros plus VAT. And then it goes on to say what it includes. This is for companies that do not conduct any business activity. If a company starts operating, naturally the amount of work increases. Even for light companies that do a small amount of business, issuing 1, 2 or 3 invoices a month, there is still significantly more work involved. Accordingly, the price is higher. The second line is highlighted in red, and this applies to almost all programming companies that are actively operating. You can see that the price is 80 euros plus VAT. So what are we interested in next? We need to somehow bring together everything I've just talked about so it's clear what your expenses will be and what your profit will look like. Let's switch back to my screen again. I've prepared a very good example there, in my opinion, and we'll take a look at it. So, look, In this hypothetical example, I assume that the company earns 4,000 euros per month. Why did I choose this particular amount? Because I see the invoices that people send to the accountant for bookkeeping, and usually the monthly revenue ranges from 3.5 to 5,000 euros. So I took an approximate figure for 1,000. Of course, maybe some people have income that doesn't go through the company's official accounts. I can't know that, but based on the invoices that active companies send to the accountant, most of them earn between 3.5 and 5,000. So in this example, 4,000 per month means 48,000 per year. Next, accounting. Again, for some people it will be less, for others more, depending on the accountant's workload. But for most, it will be 80 euros per month plus VAT. 80 euros plus VAT comes to 96.8 euros. That's the annual amount, salary. It's better to use the example I showed from my own company when considering salary. Why? Because there's no point in underestimating it. If the company is operating, you'll still be receiving money for yourself, either as salary or as dividends. And with this level of salary, there's basically no significant difference between paying dividends or paying a salary. So we set the salary and get this amount per year. You could set a higher salary, but then there would be an increased tax rate, making it less advantageous. I believe this is the optimal option unless you suddenly need to receive more money every month. And accordingly, here are the taxes on the salary per month and per year. Now we have the profit of the company. The profit comes out to 48,000. That is, revenue minus these expenses gives us the profit. And from this profit, a certain tax was paid 9%. Here is the amount, 3,313 euros. So the net profit to item 3 minus item 4, that is total profit minus profit tax, comes out to 34,500 euros. After receiving this money, you'll probably want to withdraw it as dividends. You pay a 15% dividend tax, and as a result, you get 29,000 euros in dividends in hand. So salary plus dividends, that is, over the year you receive 36,327 euros, and at the same time you paid a certain amount in taxes. The calculation is almost exact. I didn't include some minor expenses, for example, the surcharge on the policy, that is the tax on the tax, because first of all, it's very small and doesn't really change the overall picture. And secondly, it varies between different municipalities. To be honest, I don't know how to cover all possible examples of it in a single video. Well, friends, that's probably all there is to it. I think I've given you all the information. We've talked about what taxes apply when running a company, what you need to start operating, and essentially how much you'll actually receive after taxes. My name is Dimitri. You can contact me with questions about immigration, about life in the country, and of course with questions about accounting services. Currently, we provide accounting services for companies registered in Herceg Novi and Podgorica. In the near future, we plan to start offering accounting services for companies registered in other cities as well. Specifically, in the near future, we plan to expand to Budva. And a bit later, we also plan to expand to Bar. Goodbye, everyone.